Thanks for being here, Rebecca. I'm super excited to have this conversation, to talk with you and to share your expertise with the listeners of the Finding Elevation podcast. We have a lot of stuff to get into, but I like backgrounds. I like to know how people got where they are today and what is the path that led you there. So maybe we can start there. I'm curious, as a dietitian, how did you end up at this intersection between endurance sports and mountain athletes and nutrition? Tell us about that.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and be having this conversation with you. To try and keep it short, I've been a dietitian for just over 20 years. I always knew I wanted to do sports nutrition. That kind of took me along the path initially into the field of sport. But then as a kid and as growing up, I'd always been into the outdoors. Trail running was my first love. So I'd spent a lot of time outdoors growing up as a kid. And so then the kind of my passion for the outdoors and sports nutrition then just combined as I started walking the path of my career. I trained to be a dietitian first, spent a couple of years just really upskilling my clinical skills and just kind of establishing myself as a dietitian, and then moved into sport where I lived in Scotland working with elite Olympic level athletes. And at the same time, when I was in Scotland, I learned to ski tour. I did a lot more climbing indoors and outdoors. So the kind of the passions and the path kind of started to align then. And then I left my job in elite sport and set up my own business. The passion was just inside of me. I really wanted to work in outdoor sports. At the time, there wasn't much sound nutrition information, evidence-based information being given to people that went into the outdoors. So I was like, I've sort of recognized there was a bit of a gap, and then kind of really got into my first kind of outdoor area was working with climbers, and I worked with the GB climbing team and then ultra runners in the UK. And then 8 years ago, we moved to the Chamonix Valley in the French Alps. My husband at the time was training to be a mountain guide. So I was like, well, me and the dog of the movable objects, let's go and let's see how we get on. And then 8 years down the line, my business has just grown from strength to strength. We are in the outdoor capital of Europe here. And it's just, if you get to do your passion, it just really fuels your creativity and your love of the job, and they just combine. And so over the last 8 years, I've worked with over 200 mountain sports athletes alike, ultra runners, both from the recreational to the elite level athletes.
Love it. And I feel the same way, that what I love and what I think I'm good at have combined in the job that I get to do today. And like you said, for me, I certainly have long days, but it's never as arduous as it was when I had a corporate job. It's fun to get to help people, and it's fun to see where they're starting from and the questions they have, or maybe the things they're struggling with, and then provide some knowledge and expertise and see how that changes not just their performance or their ability to do what they love, but also their lives. I think that's really especially true in the case of nutrition. You've probably seen it all, right? I imagine every sort of mistake or misconception. Can you give us a couple things that generally get wrong, the athletes, when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, if we're kind of talking specifically kind of mountain sport athletes, ultra endurance runners, and again, I'm talking about recreational athletes to the elite level. The most common mistakes that I see are that these people don't plan and practice the nutrition and hydration strategy for the main event, whether it's summiting a mountain, whether it's running a race, whether it's doing a backpacking multi-day hike. I tend to see that people are like, right, I can eat this during the day, or I've tested this out a little bit, or I tend to just take that with me during training, so it'll be fine. People don't kind of have a nutrition strategy per hour for their moving time for their main events, whether we're moving in the mountains or whether we're running an ultra race. We feel that we're going to be okay. We'll just take things that we think are going to go down and be okay, and don't plan and practice it. And we don't plan and practice it enough. So that's the biggest mistake that I think makes the biggest difference. And when it comes to people's performance in the mountains or in a race, people forget to eat and drink, whether it's if we're training or if we're in an event, climbing a mountain, running a race, we get distracted, the nerves overcome us. And again, we just forget to eat and drink, or we haven't practiced it, so we don't know where to put it. So we put it somewhere that we then can't reach. Maybe the Nalgene's buried in the bottom of the bag, or our bags are foods in pockets that we can't quite reach to because the bag's in the way. So it's just really practical aspect of having a plan and practicing it, not just making sure we're getting enough energy and hydration. So forgetting to eat. And then if you plan and practice enough, that starts to get you into the habit of eating and drinking. So then it becomes almost second nature to us. So not planning and practicing, forgetting to eat and drink, starting to eat and drink too late. Like sometimes we just go for a period of time until we start to feel hungry or we start to feel thirsty. And by then it's too late. We're then playing catch up, or at that point we start to run out of energy, or we may bonk. So then starting too late. So just waiting till we feel hungry, waiting till we feel thirsty. Or people just think, oh, I feel okay. Like I feel okay, so I don't need to fuel or hydrate. I can just get through. Whereas actually we don't quite appreciate we can actually feel better and have more energy and have more enjoyment out of these experiences, and maybe run faster or maybe summit more efficiently. And then the other mistake is that we just focus on calories. Sometimes we put these nice spreadsheets together in terms of, oh, this is how many calories I'm going to eat per day, but don't necessarily then plan specifically for that moving time. So what are we going to eat and drink whilst we're on the move, to optimize our energy levels, offset significant dehydration? They're the big ones.
And I seen all those things to different degrees. And I felt like I did a pretty good job with nutrition until you and I started working together. And I realized that there was so much more I could do in terms of planning and practicing and being thoughtful. And one of the things that really impressed me with you and the way that you work with athletes is that you create this whole plan, a spreadsheet for what people should be doing for each hour that they're moving. Can you walk people through how you think about that? So, if I'm going to go climbing for 9 hours, how should I be thinking about that moving time in terms of hydration and nutrition?
Again, that was one of the things I've noticed, having worked with many, many, many mountain sport athletes, ultra runners. We're not thinking about specifically of that moving time, particularly in the mountains. We tend to just take a whole load of food with us and kind of hope for the best without actually having planned and practiced and thought about, what am I going to eat whilst I'm actually moving, and then how is that going to look and feel like? So then it's taking the mountain objective that you're working towards, taking it day by day, looking at the itinerary, looking at the moving time per hours, looking at the conditions, the altitude, the terrain, the technical difficulty, the technical ability of that athlete, and the fitness of that athlete, to then formulate this nutrition strategy per hour of moving time. You can make it easy and make it simple, but then taking into all of those factors into account, you can then really make a nice, neat, simple strategy for each hour. So what are you going to eat per hour of moving time?
Mm-hmm.
How much are you going to drink per hour of moving time? And then potentially walking through each day with that mountain sport athlete to then understand, how are you going to eat that? When are you going to eat that, based on what each day looks like? But it's the moving time per hour, and then creating that nutrition strategy per day. So then that person can then go away and practice that in training sessions, long hikes, long runs, weighted hikes. And then it's creating that habit, that getting used to eating on the go, getting used to having something in your stomach, but also just getting used to that motion. I'm going to eat something every hour. So then you're already practicing, it already feels a habit. And so then when you come to then you're moving in the mountain time, that's removing some decision making away from you as well, because you know what you're going to eat, it works, it goes down, and it's going to help optimize your energy level. So by practicing and planning that per hour of moving time for each day, it can help just really remove some decision making for you for when you're in the mountains. We've got enough to think about and consider, and then also just help give you confidence that actually what you've got is going to work, and really just know that you're going to have energy to really move well in the mountains.
And I think one of the things I realized and have seen with athletes that I've worked with too is that it totally does take out the decision making. You just know at this time or within the next hour, I'm going to eat these things. And there's no like, oh, I think this bar sounds good, or maybe I'll have this goo. You've already not only thought about it and planned it, but tested it. And there's so many things in the mountains that we can't control, and not having control can be stressful for us. And so this to me is one more thing that I can control, and I've planned it and I've tested it, and I just grab my bag for what I'm going to have on hour 2, and that's what I'm going to eat.
Which is a really great point about the stress and the control. You know, food and nutrition is one of those things that you can control, and we can really have that plan dialed before you go. And it can make a huge difference in terms of the success of the trip, in terms of weight loss. The goal is then to offset significant weight loss. We are potentially expecting some weight loss when we go into the mountains, but, you know, I've had people go into the mountains, Denali, go into Ecuador, who've lost 14 pounds, and then, you know, on their first attempt to Denali, and then when I've helped them put in a nutrition strategy for moving time for each day, they've come back and they've only lost 6 pounds in weight. You know, that can make or break a trip in terms of, you know, if you're losing that amount of weight, it means you're not getting enough energy on board, which then really has a huge influence both on how you adjust to altitude, your moving time, and your ability to move and recover, achieve your objective.
Yeah, totally. We're talking about broadly now about nutrition, but I know you get very particular in terms of macros that people should eat. And I think that's very personal. But what are some general guidelines people should follow, especially if they listen to this episode and they realize they could up their nutrition game a little bit? What are some easy guidelines people could start to employ in terms of macros when they're moving?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing to start with would be look at how long you're going to be actually moving for in terms of hours per day during your objective. And then look at your access to food. Are you a supported or a self-supported trip? Mm-hmm. And then what I would often take is on board is the technical difficulty, or whether it's a fast descent, and how much weight are they then able to carry. To keep it really simple, look at moving time per hour. Then look at, you know, you really want to get your energy from carbohydrates first. And so really looking at potentially, and then the differences between, do you want to take sports products or real food options with you? And I would say it will be a mix of both. And so then carbohydrate based options, so whether that's energy bars, oat and pressed fruit and nut based bars, whether it's kind of sports waffles, whether it's gels, whether it's chews, whether it's goldfish, whether it's, I'm trying to think of all the popular things that people take, whether it's splits, so whether it's peanut butter and jam or jelly, those kind of things you want to be thinking about. And then thinking about initially just starting off with one kind of snack per hour moving time. And if people then want calories, carbohydrate first, then look at calories, you are looking at around 200 to 400 calories per hour. So then that's when protein and then the fat then comes in terms of, like, if you're adding in nut butter, then that will contribute calories, but then a slower release source of energy, which is the fat, but also a change in flavor. And then if you're looking at protein, whether that's jerky, nuts, protein bars, then the protein again offers more, you know, a little bit more calories, certainly recovery for day to day whilst, you know, moving day to day, but then also flavor change. So it's kind of carbohydrates first, one snack per hour of moving time, looking at calories, 200 to 400 calories per hour, then thinking about protein and fats as a contribution of energy, recovery for protein day to day, and then change in flavor.
I think it's interesting to me too that I used to follow this idea about eating a lot of protein when I was in the mountains. And it wasn't until I started climbing at bigger elevations and realized, and please correct me if this is inaccurate, but as we climb higher, our body starts to shift blood away from our systems that it's deems as not necessary for survival. And one of those systems is our digestive tract. And so not only do carbs give you the energy that we need for exercise, but at elevation, especially, our body, it's much easier for our body to digest a carb than it is a piece of meat and protein. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, it's about managing people's appetite. What is the primary fuel source? And then what are the appropriate foods or sports products that are going to contribute towards that? People do like to eat the cheese and the meats potentially in the mountains, but that often comes at camp, at base. Some people may choose to take it with them, but I'd kind of suggest maybe add it in as a treat or as additional option, but really it needs to be the carbohydrate based fuel sources, because the higher we go, the more carbohydrate we tend to rely on. And yes, as our digestive system slows, protein is harder to digest, and so then those protein rich foods like the meats and the cheeses that tend to be popular may be a bit harder to go down and don't necessarily give us that energy that we need to then move efficiently in the mountains. Calories is important when we go into the mountains, but again, it's just that comes, for me, that's another topic in terms of appetite and just practicing your nutrition strategy well. So in just getting used to things going down, we almost almost need to become robotic in terms
Right.
of when we go into the mountains. I've had conversations with people like, oh, but it's not the food that I have at home. And I'm like, well, practice, find out what that food is you're going to be given at the
Yeah.
camps and eat that at home. So you're used to eating it. And we almost need to switch off that I like it. Oh, I really fancy it. I could just do with this headspace, because the higher up we go in the mountain, the more we lose our appetite. We will lose our appetite. So we just need to have something that goes down. It obviously doesn't make us sick, not going to make us unwell, but it goes down. So whether that's liquid calories, whether it's a gel, whether it's chews, whether it's sweets, whether it's your favorite chocolate bar, it needs to be something that then just goes down. And that's what comes into the strategy. But again, for me, what plays into that is having a well-planned and practiced nutrition plan, because whatever we put in, I talk through, it just needs to go down. On the protein piece, we do need to get some protein in when we're at altitude, but you can get that from the liquid calories. So often at the end of that moving time day, I would tell everybody, whilst you're setting up camp, whilst you're getting organized, have a recovery shake or a meal replacement shake like Huel or Tailwind Recovery or Perpetuum. Those tend to be some of the popular ones, but have that and start drinking. That helps with the rehydration process. We'll add in some protein. And again, hopefully it will go down relatively easily if you've got a poor appetite, because it's a liquid.
So going back to what you said about just flipping that switch, I've had that same conversation with athletes. The way I frame it is similar to you in that it's not, I don't get to make a choice about what I want to eat. I'm not going to a restaurant. I'm not opening my refrigerator. This food is fuel. And it's not meant to be pleasurable necessarily, which is often how we view food, especially in Western cultures, that this is pleasurable. It's something I desire to eat. And in the mountains, like you said, it's about changing that narrative in our brains and instead looking at it as something that's necessary to achieve our goals. And it doesn't matter if it's not the ideal thing we'd like to eat that day, or if it's not what we'd like to eat if we were at home. It's about helping us reach our goals in the mountains.
Yeah, and it
So
can
I
be
think,
done. I work with ultra runners, and for 20 hours, they're fueling on 90 to 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which can be,
wow.
a sports drink and 2 or 3 gels every hour for 20 hours. And it can be done and it can be tolerated. So it's about, really just practicing it and getting used to it. And like you said, switching that brain. It's a fantastic analogy. We can't go into a restaurant, like going into a restaurant and choosing, what do I fancy today? What do I really feel like
Right.
eating? It's, take something with you that then, maybe will be that something if you're at higher altitudes that you'll really want to have, if that's something that you've experienced before. But again, finding something that will just go down. You just put it in, easy to go down, and it will go down. Obviously, as I said, without causing any adverse reactions.
Totally. And then you mentioned starting to have some sort of recovery drink or meal when you get to camp and you're getting settled. And what you said to me once was like, your recovery starts at the very end of your exercise. And I had sort of thought like, I'll worry about that tonight when I get home, or later today sometime. But I hadn't really thought about the fact that what I did when I concluded that exercise was going to help me recover and be ready for, like in the case of a multi-day race or climb, be in a better position for the next day. So talk a little bit about that, why that's important and what having those recovery drinks does for athletes.
So if you're moving in the mountains, and even if you are eating every hour whilst you're moving, you're not going to be eating to meet your energy expended. That's not the goal either. The goal is to, when you're moving in the mountains, optimize energy levels, offset significant dehydration. And then the window of time that you have when you stop, when you get to camp, when you're setting up camp, if that's what's required of you, is then using that window of time before you get going again, whether it's the early morning or the night, the same time, or the following day. It's like, I need to rehydrate and I need to refuel to really stay ahead and stay on top of your energy levels and recovery. So that's the recovery shake is brilliant in terms of it gives you a source of carbohydrate energy. It gives you protein to help with recovery. It gives you fluid, liquid to help with the rehydration process. So it's a great combination to really get the rehydration, the recovery process going when you're in the mountains and getting calories in ASAP. And then when it comes to your training, recovery is a 24-hour process. Often we just think of it as just that 2-hour window after training. That 2-hour window after training can and does become important if we've got a higher training load, training volume of the week, which does happen. And when we're training to go into the mountains or training ultra endurance distances, we've got a lot of training to do in the week, which is very highly energy demanding, takes up a lot of energy, costs us a lot of energy. So the idea then is to get the recovery in, because recovery is a 24-hour process. Often we'll feel our muscles are sore the day after the day after. We're still recovering, we're still repairing. So the idea is to then always be thinking about what do we need to do and eat that's going to be helpful and contribute to our recovery and support our daily efforts and energy demands required of us to train and train well. So the recovery shakes are great because they are just convenient, they're easy. There's lots of, you don't have to use supplements. It's a food first approach. Glass of milk, chocolate milkshake, banana and a yogurt are all fantastic recovery products as well. But yeah, starting to kind of get the recovery process in, rehydrating, carbohydrate and protein to really recover from that session. Definitely recover straight away after sessions. If it's your long runs, long hikes, weighted hikes, that's really key. And obviously the recovery shakes, as I said, can just start the replenishment of carbohydrate, repairing of the muscles with the protein, and the rehydration process with the fluid.
Yeah, that really changed my definition of recovery, and it's helped me a lot to feel better. Like I notice now when I don't pay attention to recovery immediately after I've done something, it makes a big difference in just how I feel the next day. So let's talk about when things don't go well in the mountains or in a multi-day event. You mentioned bonking earlier. So, and I think we all probably have experienced that. I remember the first time I attempted Rainier, of course, I had no idea what I was doing. Definitely did not have my nutrition dialed. And I remember getting to the edge of the crater, so almost the summit, and just having no energy. I was lightheaded probably from the altitude. And I thought, oh my God, I'm bonking. Like, this is what I've been hearing people talk about. So what's happening physiologically when that happens? Obviously, you're behind in calories, but what's really going on? And is there a way to recover from that? Or is it like you're just behind the curve and that's not possible to catch up?
If you're bonking, then it's likely that your muscle glycogen, your muscle carbohydrate levels have become depleted to a point that they're unable to keep you moving at that momentum. So when you bonk or your muscle glycogen, muscle carbohydrate levels drop, you lose your power output. So you can keep moving, but you slow down, because then your body needs to then start to tap into more fat as a fuel source to then be able to keep you moving. So when you start to use up and get lower muscle carbohydrate levels, you certainly lose your power output. So you have to slow down. So then that's when we feel the experience of bonking, and then also our blood sugars also drop because we haven't been eating enough carbohydrate or staying on top of our energy levels regularly enough to then offset and avoid that bonking. I will go back to again what I was saying earlier. For 90% plus of people I support, if you have a well-planned and practiced nutrition strategy, you can avoid bonking. And so it's really, when you start to kind of plan and practice your strategy, it is a bit onerous. It takes a bit of effort. But once you've got it, you've got it. And then you can start to mix in the variety once you know what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat, how much you're going to drink. So then, you can always keep mixing up the variety, keeping it interesting. So again, keeping you eating, fueling throughout your moving time. So I reiterate, plan, practice lots of times so you've got your strategy dialed. But then if you do, for whatever reason, end up running low on energies and bonking, so really just powering down, getting the shakes, feeling lightheaded. The idea is to take a minute, slow down, kind of really, obviously we're not going to be able to keep powering through and pushing on, and eat something. Really you want something that's fast acting carbohydrate, and then back it up something a bit more substantial. So whether you've got some chews or you've got some glucose tabs or you've got a gel, take that, but then back it up with something that's a bit more substantial. Because if we just take the gels or the chews, we're just going to swallow that energy up quite quickly and our blood sugars are going to drop again. So then maybe back it up with a bar if you've got a bar. Yeah, so try and then have something like, or a real food option, whether it's crackers crackers or whether it's pretzels or whatever you have, trail mix, really back
Yep.
it up with an additional source and then give it a minute, just give your body time to really switch back on in terms of raise your blood sugars again till you start to feel better. And then you feel like you can keep moving, obviously, if that's safe to do so. And so the idea would be have something that's close to hand, that is kind of always have that emergency gel or chew somewhere that's close to hand. So if that does happen, it could happen even if you've got the perfect, or if you've got your nutrition strategy dialed. If you find that you've been out for longer than expected, if you're post-holing, there's more snow than planned and you're having to post-hole, so you're having to work harder, if the terrain's more technical and steeper than you'd anticipated, other different reasons that might demand more energy from us that then potentially could lead to a bonk. So yeah, take that extra sugary item, but then always back it up with something else so that then you can keep going. And then if you've got it available, keep eating regularly thereafter, if you continue to keep moving.
I always have a packet of maple syrup in the waist
Great.
belt of my backpack. Just, like, no matter what I'm doing, it's just always there for an emergency, just in case. Because there have been times when exactly what you just described, I was post-holing and it was so much harder than I had planned. And I started to feel myself getting lightheaded. I remember there was one time my legs, and I think this is what you were referring to, not having enough muscle glycogen. My legs were just like jackhammering. Like I had no control over their movement and the muscle contractions. And since then, I've just always carried this emergency maple syrup with me in my backpack.
The other way you can potentially offset a bonking is that in addition to kind of one snack per hour of moving time, carbohydrate based, I also suggest to people to take at least one Nalgene full of a sports drink, and then maybe, a Nalgene and a soft flask, so you can keep the Nalgene in your backpack, have a soft flask tucked in front of you that you can have access to and keep sipping on. Some people take Camelbacks. That's a debate for another time, whether, some people like Camelbacks and
I'm
trust
pro
them.
Camelback. Yes,
I've heard all sorts of stories of people's Camelbacks being bursting and having to be stripped at altitude so they don't get hypothermia. But yeah, other people take Camelbacks and they're okay. But if you have a soft flask or you've got a Camelback straw that's not freezing, if you've got a sports drink in that, you're sipping on a regular basis on an energy source. So again, it's something that will help keep your energy levels topped up whilst you're also eating kind of that one snack every hour. The sports drink will also help offset significant dehydration because we tend to absorb more fluid when we're drinking a sports drink compared to drinking water alone. You don't have to take all of it as a sports drink, but at least have one Nalgene and a soft flask with sports drink. So then when you drank the soft flask, whenever you stop, when it's practical to do so or an opportune breaks, you can fill the soft flask back up. Or the problem I have with Camelbacks is that we don't know how much we've drank.
True.
And often I think they're quite misleading because we feel like we've drank loads and we take it out and we're like, oh, we've still got a litre left and we've taken, 2 litres with us. I'm like, oh, I've still got loads left. I felt like I was drinking loads. So that's my issue with Camelbacks. We just don't know how much we've drank.
It's totally true. I've done that many times. I think, oh, this must be empty, and I pull it out of my backpack.
Yeah, so loads in it, half full.
And I even tried measuring how much, like what mouthful of fluid is for me and trying to think, okay, well, this is 20 mouthfuls. Then I lose track of how many that didn't work either. So if anyone has a good idea about how to know how much volume you've consumed in your Camelback, I'm all ears, because I like them when I'm carrying a backpack. Otherwise I'll have a soft flask. But either way, it's about making it convenient, like you were saying. And it's just so easy to be sipping on that and have this constant supply of not just hydration, but also electrolytes and potentially carbohydrates. So let's talk a little bit more about hydration. I was shocked when you had me measure the amount of sweat that I was expelling during just a indoor bike ride, and I was completely shocked. I would never have thought. I think it was 1.5 liters or something. And if you asked me ahead of time, I would think maybe half a liter. I guess, and you maybe talked about this a little bit, but what are mistakes people make about hydration? And what are some easy tips people could start to follow if they want to just have more focus or get more out of their hydration when they're on the move?
So one of the common mistakes is that we don't focus on our hydration. People always say to me, oh, I think I drink enough, or, I feel all right. I feel okay during training. I don't drink anything during training, or I just take a litre out on the hill with me. I just take a 500 ml soft flask for my 2-hour run. I'm fine. I don't need to drink. The first thing I'd say to everybody is to start every mountain day run training session hydrated. That's the first, because if you start dehydrated, you're already, you're just going to become more dehydrated as the day or as the session goes on. If we're starting exercise dehydrated, or when we are significantly dehydrated, it increases our heart rate, it increases the perceived exertion. So the exercise, the task, it just feels harder. And also we use up more muscle glycogen potentially in our muscles when we're dehydrated, and we just feel more tired. We feel more fatigued. And especially if we're in altitude, we're going into the mountains. If we start off dehydrated, then, we're more susceptible to, or the effects of altitude sickness are worsened, or we can, experience headaches, or, really give ourselves a much harder time than we need to if we're kind of not really optimizing our hydration strategy, whether it's in training, a long run, or whether we go into the mountains. So the idea is start every session hydrated.
So I've heard different opinions about when to start your prehydration. And I've heard people say you should start it the day before. And I've heard people say you should just start it the morning of an event. And I'm curious what your opinion is. If knowing we need to start hydrated, how soon should we start getting hydrated before an event or a big day in the mountains?
The goal is to maintain optimal hydration on a daily basis. Being hydrated will, help us feel more energized, help us function in terms mentally better, help us train better. And we've got ongoing losses of fluid on a daily basis from breathing. It's warm, in the summer months, we're just sat and we're sweating. And then you're adding on training and exercise on top of that. So the idea is to make sure that you're well hydrated at least the day before. If you're trying to hydrate on the morning of, you're only going to have a couple of hours, and potentially you don't necessarily have chance to be, adequately hydrated to start your event. It can take us up to 24 hours to really rehydrate if we're significantly dehydrated. The one easy thing that people can do to just really get an idea of how much we should be drinking on a day-to-day basis is we take 35 milliliters, the volume, times by our body weight in kilograms, and that will give you, say, 2.5 liters, 2 liters, 3 liters of fluid to drink baseline per day, before taking into account any hot environment, before taking into account any exercise activity where we're then sweating. So that's a baseline. People can check, well, how much am I drinking already? Then work that out based on their body weight, and then see if you need to add more in, and make sure you start every exercise, mounting day, run, hydrated. And then we come on to, how do I make sure I'm hydrated during training or a mountain day or a run? Do we drink to thirst, or do we drink to a plan? The problem is, if people drink to thirst, particularly in the mountains, we probably wait till we are thirsty and then we drink a lot at once. And then we probably drink, all of our water supply and got none left for the rest of the day, because access to fluid is very limited. So the idea would be, when you're moving in the mountains, is sip little and often. Don't wait till you feel thirsty. But we need a plan. Even if we're drinking to thirst, you still need a plan to then when you're going to access water to drink. Or if you're just taking a smaller amount and then you drink to thirst, where are you going to top that up? So even if we have the idea to drink to thirst, you still need a plan. And I would not leave it to drink to thirst, because I think if we drink to thirst, people will be like, oh, I'll be okay, I'll just take this and I'll drink when I get thirsty. And so again, that's just setting us up to become significantly dehydrated, get tired, run out of energy, and kind of potentially have a negative influence on our day, summit a mountain, and our performance. Within training, there's a neat, easy to put into practice, I'm sure. I hope you felt it was easy to do, in terms of just weighing yourself.
It was totally easy because I'm lazy, didn't actually consume any water during the exercise test. So I just weighed myself before, exercised for an hour or something, and then weighed myself after. So easy. There's all these stats now. Garmin especially has lots of stats about how much you're sweating and how many calories you're burning. Do you find those are accurate? I'm curious if people want to do the test and compare that to what's in Garmin.
In terms of the hydration, I wouldn't rely on it. Any kind of device at the moment, we're not in a lab, a scientific lab, that's being sold to us to test our hydration, isn't necessarily valid at the moment, in terms it's not giving us a true reflection of our sweat rate if it's on your wrist on a watch kind of thing. The easiest way to do is, you can get the instructions simply off the internet by weighing yourself before, weighing yourself after a training session. It is easy to do for a 60-minute training session when you're not drinking anything, because then you can just take that weight minus the start weight after the finish weight. If you've lost a kilo, 1 kilo equals 1,000 mils, 1 liter. You've lost a liter of sweat during that training session. And then from there, I can then help you determine how much you need to drink during that session to offset significant dehydration, and then how much you then need to drink after to rehydrate, because there's ongoing sweat losses after the training from a raised metabolism, from you're still feeling warm after the training itself. So we still continue to lose fluid after sweat and fluid from the body after we finished exercise. So we need to make sure we continue to hydrate good amounts. I'm not telling people to overhydrate, but it's, I think it's one thing that many of us don't necessarily focus on enough because we feel okay. And then until we realize when we are hydrated or drink more to what we ideally need to be during training, we're like, oh, hang on a minute, I feel like I've got more energy. I can train better. I feel better. I don't feel as tired. I can focus better at work after my training session. So there's lots of positive things that by just being better hydrated for us will make a big difference. And then what I then do is understanding how people sweat. I get people to do it in different environments, different training sessions. So high intensity sessions, long runs, long hikes, weighted hikes with your running kit on, race kit on. So you can understand different temperatures, times of day, times of year, so that you get to know your own sweat rate per hour. So then that can help inform like how much hydration you can get away with drinking per hour in the mountains, and then also, per hour in a race. That really helps to inform that. It's obviously different from the mountains with access to fluids, but you can really look at what's the minimum I can drink based on my sweat rates that will really offset significant dehydration that's affordable to me that I can do when I'm in the mountains. Because again, people often really, I'm only going to take a litre and I'll be okay because save the weight.
I know. Can you make water not weigh so much? That would make this a lot easier.
But then the benefit to drinking that water either on the mountains or in a race to you and your performance and how you feel kind of far outweighs any extra weight. And you're losing that weight anyways, you're sweating. So really it's again, getting used to carrying that amount of training, whether it's for a race in your vest or whether it's for on the mountains, and becoming used to it. We just think, oh, it just feels heavier. It's just like, get used to that, because it's not about taking loads and too much. The mountains, we tend to take 2 to 3 litres. I'm not suggesting people take more than that, but it's how we drink that and what we take to drink, but then how we can also just make sure we're offsetting significant dehydration.
I was shocked. It was like, say a 2% reduction in hydration can affect your performance by 10%. And those aren't the actual numbers, but I was shocked, whatever those numbers are, at how much being even slightly dehydrated will affect your performance.
Yeah, I mean, the research nowadays suggests that maybe that 2% isn't necessarily accurate. We could maybe afford to go up to maybe 3 or 4% before potentially performances influence. Ultra runners, when they finish races, tend to be 5% dehydrated when we finish, and that's the faster finishes as well, the winners. So it doesn't necessarily apply to all sports. But then even if the argument is the research now isn't showing that, or the research isn't strong enough, it proves that now. I'm like, well, why do we want to be beyond 2%? Like potentially 3-4% we will be when we go in the mountains. We can allow that because we don't have any other means to carry more water, and then if we do, it's going to then start to cost us. So there's a window of, let's aim to offset significant dehydration is what I say. I don't tend to say 2%, and it'll probably be more likely 3 or 4, maybe 5%. But I think we will feel the effects, 3, 4, 5%, especially in the mountains. But then it's offsetting that significant dehydration is what I say. But the studies do show that, being significantly dehydrated does have a negative impact on our.
Yeah, it does. And it really is such an easy thing to plan for and to just employ every time we're out there. It makes a big difference.
Yep.
I want to talk about another topic that I hear a lot of people speaking about, and that's intermittent fasting. And I've, heard pros, cons. I've, have friends who've lost significant amounts of weights by employing that strategy. But I feel like it gets really complicated for us as athletes. And so I'd love your opinion, maybe even drawing back to your clinical experience about if that's good for us, and as athletes, if it's something we should consider or just totally avoid.
I think intermittent fasting is seen by some as the holy grail for longevity or for weight loss. Isn't necessarily accurate, but people use intermittent fasting for different reasons. So whether it is for longevity, we feel like fasting is going to really help us to live longer and help the body heal and all of those things. People use intermittent fasting, as you said, for weight loss. Intermittent fasting isn't the most superior method for weight loss. Intermittent fasting creates an energy deficit. That's all it does. There's no magic about intermittent fasting. It just helps to create an energy deficit by giving people a short window of time to eat. But if people overeat their energy intake in that short window of time, you're not not going to lose weight. So the idea of the intermittent fasting is to potentially, again, help people to lose weight by giving people a shorter window of time to eat. People use intermittent fasting as a reset. Maybe if people have gone through a period of time where they've not been in control of what they've been eating, or they've just had a period of time where they haven't eaten as healthy as they'd like to, then sometimes people use it as a reset to then maybe feel better, to then start to have, eat healthy again. And then some people use intermittent fasting to control weight and keep weight down, just as a means of potentially some form of disordered eating, or if people are kind of, have that idea of lighter is better or lighter is faster. So there's different means and reasons as to why people carry out intermittent fasting. Research is mixed. Like, intermittent fasting can be used as a motivator to help people lose weight, but people who are generally overweight and have weight to lose, not necessarily for people who don't necessarily need to lose weight, and certainly not for athletes or people who are already lean certainly don't need to lose weight. The idea for people who are doing ultra endurance events, like going into the mountains, spending hours moving or running, then certainly intermittent fasting is not recommended at all. What I've seen is that I've had supported people and discouraged people from intermittent fasting, because people intermittent fast, then they train fasted, and then they eat, which normally ends up being lunch. What happens and what we're seeing is that, as I'd said earlier, if we're training for an ultra endurance event, whether we're going in the mountains or doing an ultra run, that requires a lot of energy, or uses a lot of energy from, doing the training alone on a week to week basis. If we carry out intermittent fasting and we only have a time window to eat, that really plays into not being able to potentially get the carbohydrate in to fuel that session so we can train well, or get the carbohydrate in after that session to recover and train well. Right. So it really influences our ability to really dial in the nutrition strategy to really support and recover from that training session. What it also does is the intermittent fasting, especially if we're training fasted within that intermittent fasting window, is it increases the time that we spend in an energy deficit, but then it also increases the magnitude of that energy deficit. And it's that magnitude of energy deficit that we're seeing in the research over a long period of time starts to play into negative health and performance consequences, like changes in hormones, both for men and for women, increased risk of injury, really has a inhibiting effect on bone formation. So really has influence on poor bone health, disrupted hormones, like I said, poor recovery, because we're just not able to eat enough energy on a day-to-day basis to keep up with the energy demands of the training. And then also we haven't eaten in a window of time. And then poor training, maybe because we're not for training fasted, all of our training sessions fasted, then it's about the quality of that session. And as I said, the recovery, and just maybe the inability to get enough carbohydrate in on a day-to-day basis. And just, really increasing everybody, our risk of injury and illness, because we're just relying on eating all of our calories in this window, regardless of when we're training. And it's the magnitude of this energy deficit that we've seen has an influence on an athlete or someone who's training at a higher volume, like mountain sports and ultra endurance, over a longer period of time, has negative impact. So I would discourage anybody from doing intermittent fasting. We just don't need to do it at all, really. But I know some people are strong advocates of it.
I love food. I don't know how I get that part of your fasting window is when you're sleeping, but I still don't know how people do it. But it does make me think about fat adaptation. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit, because there are times as endurance athletes when we want to train fasted in order to force our bodies to get used to using fat as a fuel source as opposed to carbs. What are your thoughts about that?
Again, we don't need to do it. Just by going out and doing the training alone, the endurance training, the aerobic, the base building training, has an influence on our ability to use fat as a fuel source. So just by going out and doing the training over time increases our body's ability to use fat as a fuel source. And we don't need to incorporate fasted training. And it's not something, again, that's recommended to do, because if we're going out for, if we're going out doing our training sessions fasted and we have a high energy demand from the volume of our training each week. We're just losing the opportunity to both eat carbohydrate and to meet our daily energy demands. And again, that done over a long period of time. We've seen that in the research, it's shown there's negative effects to performance. It's just not something that people really need to be doing, because we can get increases in fat oxidation just by going out and doing the training alone. And I've seen that. I work with elite ultra runners and we've been testing them. And, we have runners that have got higher fat oxidation rates, and we have elite runners that don't have as high fat oxidation rates, but they're all performing, well, they're all training well, performing well. So, as a natural response, training, fat oxidation rates will go up. And so we don't necessarily need to increase that or enhance that by doing fasted training, because we still want, we still need time for the training effect to happen and get fit. So it's just giving everything time in terms of to get fit. And then as a result, our fat oxidation levels increase with that. It's, our performance isn't just solely based on our fat oxidation rates. It's, building fitness over time and all of the other physiological adaptations that happen as a result. So it's definitely a nuance we don't need to think about for anyone that's kind of currently training to go into the mountains or ultra running. Fuel your training and go and train is the one, and then the rest will happen itself naturally.
Yep. 100% agree with that. Well, I could keep asking you questions all day, Rebecca. I find all of this very fascinating, and the impact that nutrition and hydration have on performance is just hugely interesting to me. So thanks for sharing. And I'm sure listeners will find your insights very useful and beneficial. If someone wants to connect with you one-on-one or find out more, what are the best ways for them to reach out to you?
Best ways is probably on Instagram. I'm at high performance dietitian, at high_performance_dietitian. And you can either drop me a message there, or you can book straight in for a, free, no obligation 20-minute discovery call just to chat through people's goals, like find out how I can support people and what help that they want. It's always a great opportunity just to speak to people and find out about what people's goals are.
Absolutely. We'll do that. And thank you again, Rebecca, for joining us
and
sharing and helping all the athletes that you've helped. It's really making a difference.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.